Thank you all for making the time in your schedules to come and join us here for the Signature Serve webinar. For anyone joining us after the fact in the ADI community, this is being offered in association with the Signature Serve Invitational, which is the first cocktail competition that we're offering as part of the American Distilling Institute's annual conference and trade show. It's going to be taking place this August in San Antonio in association with the trade show. And the live attendees here are the 5 distiller brands and the 5 Texas bartenders that are going to be competing. So again, we will be offering this to all ADI members as part of our educational initiative, but those are the folks who are getting it live. My name is Eric Kozlik. I'm the founder and principal consultant at Direct Fire Consulting. I've been judging spirits for ADI since 2018, and I'm also the host of the Modern Bar Cart podcast, where I interview distillers, bartenders, beverage directors, spirits and cocktail experts of all shapes and sizes. So I take a very multidisciplinary approach to the spirit space and the cocktail space. I'm looking at things from a lot of different angles, just based on the types of people I'm interviewing and the types of people that I'm working with through my consulting work. So hopefully that broad and kind of diverse lens set that I have is going to be helpful to our thinking about signature serve cocktails. So please, if you have any questions and you're worried that you'll forget them, go ahead and drop those in the chat, but we'll hit a Q&A segment at the end here, and I'd like to get into an overview of what we're going to cover in this webinar. We're going to begin by talking about what signature serve cocktails are, and also importantly, what they're not. Then we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts, the musculature and skeleton that makes these cocktails effective and powerful at what they do. And as we do that, we're going to go through certain case studies that illustrate the points that we make. Finally, we're going to wrap up by covering some how-to content, basically give you some tools that help you as competitors to develop the signature serve cocktails that you're going to be featuring in this competition. So jumping right into that definition, I want to caveat this by saying this is not an internationally accepted definition. This is not the International Bartender Association. This is not USBG's definition. But for the purposes of bartenders and distillers, I think it's a really good cut and dry place to start. A signature serve cocktail is a simple, viral cocktail, emphasis on simple, emphasis on viral, that celebrates a specific product by a specific brand. So when I say a signature serve in this presentation, that's what I'm referring to. And when we look at this definition, certain cocktails jump to mind, right? For me, I think the most iconic, the first thing I think of when I hear the word signature serve, I think of the Gosling's Black Seal Dark and Stormy, right? Iconic because they have a reputation for being a little bit litigious, right? They've trademarked this, and if you put a Dark and Stormy on your menu in your bar and you don't feature Gosling's Black Seal rum and it gets out, then you might find yourself the recipient of a cease and desist letter. So they've sort of made a name for themselves as protecting their signature serve with some IP. Another rum cocktail, the Painkiller, famously uses Pusser's rum in their build. So interesting that we have a couple of members of the rum world in the signature serve arena. But then there might be other cocktails that might not be so obvious to you when you think of a signature serve, or cocktails maybe that seem like they're hiding in plain sight. So I love the Jaeger bomb as an example of a signature serve because it's not really a cocktail, right? When you think of a serious cocktail, a Jaeger bomb is not it, but nonetheless, it is something that is served to a guest at a bar. And so in that respect, because it's featuring Jägermeister, it does qualify as a signature serve. And then kind of in the hiding in plain sight category, we've got the Aperol Spritz, which interestingly wasn't trademarked in the United States until 2015. So the trademark on this cocktail, despite the cocktail being approaching a century old, the trademark on it and the, I guess, renewed interest in it is only about 10 to 15 years old. So it's interesting how historical forces can kind of lead to renewed interest in these brand-driven cocktails. So when I look at all these examples kind of arrayed before us, one thing that's troubling to me from a zoomed out standpoint is that they don't really seem to resemble each other, right? It's hard to compare a Jaeger bomb to an Aperol spritz to a painkiller and really tease out any very obvious things that these drinks are all doing in common, except for featuring the specific brand, the specific product by the specific brand. So hopefully, as we go through this webinar, some other things about these cocktails that they have in common will become apparent. I want to spend some time talking about what signature serves aren't, and the bullet points on this list share one important thing in common, and that thing is that when you're looking at these cocktail types, the spotlight, the focus is taken distinctly away from that specific product by that specific brand. So, case in point, Riffs on Classics or their cousin, the Mr. Potato Head experiment, these cocktail types work precisely because you can sub in pretty much anything, whether you're talking about a spirit type in the case of like a Mr. Potato Head experiment where you're swapping out one spirit like gin in a last word and you're swapping in mezcal, right? Or if it's a riff on a classic, you can really use any member of a spirit category, any bourbon, any rye, any London dry gin, for example. So they're popular because they're so flexible, because they're almost in one sense of the word idiot proof. You know, any home bartender who follows the recipe can make these cocktails successfully, and any skilled bartender can make them really, really well. That makes them attractive, but again, the spotlight is off of that specific product by that specific brand, and so they are not, by definition, signature serves. Now, bartenders and bars kind of play an interesting role in signature serves because they can be important to the development of the signature serve, of course, but they are not the necessary component of the signature serve. And I really love to use the painkiller as an example of this, as proof, because uh, you can have a perfectly wonderful, perfectly authentic painkiller, and you don't have to go to the Soggy Dollar Bar in the British Virgin Islands where it was developed to get one, right? That's a nice little side quest if you want to go there and you want to have a painkiller at the place it was invented. But what you really do need is the Pusser's rum. The drink feels somewhat lesser if for some reason you've taken that specific product by that specific brand out of the equation. Right? Not so with certain other cocktails, right? If I want to go, right, Tails is right around the corner. If I want to go to the Roosevelt Bar, well, of course I'm going to be getting a Ramos Gin Fizz there. If I'm going to Duke's Bar in London, of course I'm getting the martini service. But those are sort of cocktails that are about those bars, right? Not about specific products and specific brands. Um, Seasonality is also a killer when it comes to signature serves because what it does is it limits the sort of like the scope and the approachability of the drink. So whether we're talking about a hyper seasonal ingredient or a flavor profile that might be only approachable in a specific type of season. I'm thinking like hot buttered rum, which is only appealing to me and probably to most people in a very specific tranche of the seasonal year. Those types of seasonal ingredients and seasonal flavors limit the work that a signature serve cocktail can do in its broad appeal. Two other things I want to quickly mention here. On the previous slide, I mentioned trademarks a couple of times, and you will see intellectual property protection as a feature of the signature serve landscape, but it's a way downstream consequence of developing a successful signature serve rather than some sort of ingredient that needs to be brought into making the signature serve. So if you make a great signature serve, your brand gets popular, you get absorbed by an international liquor conglomerate. They have lawyers who can go ahead and do those multinational trademarks, and that's why you see them. But it's not something that should be front of mind while you're developing these cocktails. And finally, I want to just quickly mention post hoc product pairings, which doesn't make a lot of sense as a phrase, but as an example, think of Sazerac rye. right? We all know that the Sazerac cocktail has a long and storied history prior, far, far prior to anyone launching a product called Sazerac Rye. And so when you see that, as anybody who knows about the Sazerac cocktail, there you get sort of like this uncanny valley. It's actually it feels somehow less genuine that you're shoehorning this specific product into a cocktail format and implying that you really need to be using it to make the cocktail when you know that the cocktail existed long before this product and can be made well using any sort of member of that category, any rye, really, or hell, cognac, right? Specifically with the Sazerac. So just remember, in this respect, it's important to build the cocktail around the brand rather than trying to shoehorn a brand into an existing cocktail format. This all begs the question, what sort of products are really primed for use in signature serve cocktails? And to me, when I think of this question, one word jumps to mind: flagship, right? Flagship products. And these bullet points are all kind of different ways of thinking about what great flagship products, or great, you can also call it like a keystone product, what great flagship products do, or qualities that they have. All right. One is that they stand on their own and don't rely on other products around them in a portfolio to sort of explain or justify their value, right? There's a reason why this competition is the Signature Serve Invitational. And that is because when we were looking around the Texas spirits landscape, we saw a lot of brands that were doing great work, especially in the whiskey space, right? There's so many wonderful Texas whiskey brands, but they're all following the same playbook. And that playbook is the brand and the products in the portfolio gather more value the more other products you stack next to them, and the more that consumers have a chance to fall in love with that bigger brand based on when they release their port cask finish and their double oak finish and all that stuff. A flagship product doesn't operate like that. As we'll see in just a moment, it has its own sort of point of view, its own reason for being that doesn't rely on other products around it to justify itself. Also, flagship products and products that are featured in signature serve cocktails exist almost by definition at a cocktail friendly price point. If bartenders won't mix with them because they're not profitable, and if home consumers are afraid to mix with them because they're so expensive and they're nervous that they're going to waste a couple of ounces on something that ends up being a drain pour, then they're not really primed for use in a signature serve cocktail. We'll talk about some of the economic engines of signature serves in just a slide or two. Finally, we've got a tension here at the end, and this tension is really important, and I think bears some time thinking about. On the one hand, flagship products have this wide sort of appeal, right? Otherwise, it really wouldn't be a flagship product, right? You don't launch with a product that you think only a small handful of your total potential audience is going to resonate with, right? You launch with something broadly appealing. And the parenthetical here, the aspirational side of things, I think a lot about this Jaeger bomb, because when Jägermeister was first brought to the United States, like, nobody knew what to do with it, right? And in that sense, it wasn't broadly appealing. And the fun story about the Jaeger bomb is it's the story of how Jägermeister cracked that broad appeal by sort of unlocking one crucial element of their product, which is the sort of like murky, a little scary medicinal quality of it. And they found the perfect audience for that in the 20-something club going crowd, and the perfect pairing to go with it, Red Bull, and ended up unlocking that sort of broad appeal, right? So even if you don't have a product that most people would consider broadly appealing in the spirits landscape, and I think we have a couple of those brands in this competition, maybe the Signature Serve is one of the ways that you make progress down that road of introducing the product to a wider audience and gaining that broad appeal, right? So some sort of broad appeal is important, and yet that appeal can't come at the expense of a specific or unique value proposition. You still have to have a unique point of view. You still have to have a point that your product is trying to make. So that's the tension. You want to have a balance between some sort of broad appeal, or at least an aspiration to be broadly appealing, and still not lose your unique or specific value proposition to that audience in the process. So that tension is going to be what we navigate sort of for the rest of this presentation. But now that we've done the big picture work, sort of in the abstract, I think we want to get into the anatomy of the signature serve. And really, what this is going to boil down to is those three important aspects of that definition I gave a couple of slides ago: the simplicity, the virality, and the brand component of the signature serve. So let's do a deeper dive into those three traits, beginning with simplicity. Signature serves tend to be simple in a couple of ways. And these different types of simplicity drive a specific economic outcome. So the simplicity of the cocktail, the signature serve, is that the drink on the menu and when it is served to guests at the bar has a very clear value proposition. Guests know exactly what they're getting and why they're getting it, and what they're going to get when they order it. A nice litmus test for this kind of simplicity is, does simply by looking at the name of the signature serve on the menu or by seeing one go by on a server's tray, can you kind of figure out what this cocktail is all about without having to know more, right? This kind of propositional simplicity is shared across the signature serve landscape. The other type is a procedural simplicity. It's easy for bartenders to make. And every bartender in this meeting knows that, with all other things being equal, right? Price point and bar setup and all the other aspects that play into a service setting, all other things being equal, when you've got two cocktails that are equivalent in most other ways, the one that is simpler to make is always going to be the one that you push, whether that's consciously or subconsciously, right? Whether it's just sort of happens over time that cocktail gets emphasized. When this happens, a flywheel kicks off. The simpler cocktail to make gets made more quickly, which means service times are reduced. It also means that as you turn this cocktail more and more quickly, you go through your fresh ingredients more often. And so you don't have ingredients going bad. So guests get quicker cocktails with fresher ingredients. You get more and more practice making them behind the bar, meaning that people's stations get sort of designed and optimized around this cocktail. And over time, this flywheel results in happier people. All of the little ergonomic decisions behind the bar get optimized, and the downstream consequence of that gets seen and felt on a balance sheet, right? And when bar managers and ownership start seeing something doing really well for them on the balance sheet, you get other nice little features like permanent menu placement and maybe brand swag partnerships, right? One of the fun details I like to share, being based in the DC area, is that most Italian, or even more broadly speaking, Mediterranean joints with patios in DC, I remember walking around a year or two ago and just seeing Aperol umbrellas everywhere. They all had Aperol umbrellas. And I think that's a wonderful, sort of like wonderful way to signal to people that, yeah, you want a spritz? We got spritzes. Which leads me to our first case study in simplicity, the Aperol Spritz. I love this cocktail because its proposition is so clear. It is so broadly pairable. It is so light and bright and easy that it's the default answer to, what do I drink when I'm at an Italian place and I'm having some small plates on the patio, right? It's aperitivo hour. What else are you going to drink? It's spritz time. Very clear value proposition, and it's got the added benefit of being a low ABV option. So you feel like you're being good, which means you can order more than one, right? Uh, there's no simpler cocktail to make. I'm sure there is, but for the purposes of this slide, there are I can't think of many cocktails that are simpler to make. It's a 2 bottle pickup on the Aperol and the Prosecco, splash of soda water, pre-made garnish. A round of these can go out in a minute if you're good, a minute and a half if you're taking your time. So service time is super quick. And the thing I love most about the Aperol Spritz is that no one is trying to fool anybody with how expensive the ingredients are. Everybody from bar ownership all the way down to the end consumer is well aware of exactly what kind of prosecco is going in here, the bottom shelf, and we all know what Aperol is at the liquor store. We all know it's somewhere between $20 and $25 MSRP, right? So we don't think nobody thinks they're getting a hyper premium pour with an Aperol Spritz, and yet somehow these ingredients all paired together with the service and the look and feel of it when it goes out, it makes you feel like you're getting something super special. So the pour cost is great and the margins are excellent, making the Aperol Spritz a wonderful economic workhorse in any cocktail menu. The next trait that I want to talk about is the virality, the viral delivery mechanism, i.e. the signature in the serve. And any signature serve cocktail has at least 2, if not 3 of these different components. And I say 2 or 3 because every signature serve cocktail that I can think of is fun to say or order, right? It's got this viral, almost fajita effect thing going on right in the name of it, meaning that you get some sort of reward mentally just for saying this cocktail. And we'll run down this in just a second, but I want to point out that all of the parenthetical cocktails listed on this slide, they're not all signature serve cocktails, but they are all excellent examples of the viral delivery mechanism in question, right? So let's go back to this fun to say or order thing. So just to illustrate the point, we're going to use the revolver as a case study later, so I'm going to skip that one. But what would you prefer ordering? What's more fun to say? An old fashioned or a Sazerac, right? Regular martini or an espresso martini or a porn star martini, right? Jaeger bomb, certainly for its target demographic, is exciting and effective to say. You want a rum buck or a dark and stormy? Spritz is a word that gives you energy just by saying it. And what do you want? Tequila soda lime or a ranch water? So I don't have a structured way for you to think about naming a signature serve cocktail, but they all do seem to be super fun to say. And so I would spend a disproportionate amount of effort on the naming convention for the signature serve if you want it to slot in with its brothers and sisters in the existing signature serve landscape. In addition to that quasi-mandatory trait, we've got a few others here. One that I like is the sort of service ritual. Think about a Sazerac. What separates it from an old fashioned? It's the absinthe rinse. And the service ritual slows things down and it gives consumers almost like this quality checkpoint that when they see you do it, they know a couple of things. They know that they're getting the genuine article, and 2, that you're spending a little bit of extra time just for them, because the more generic cocktails don't require this special thing, whether that's the absinthe roll and discard, the atomization of the absinthe, or in the case of the espresso martini, the 1 or 3 espresso beans on top. God forbid we use an even number, that'd be bad luck or something. But case in point, if you were to order an espresso martini from me and I were to shake one up and serve it to you without an espresso bean on top or without the 3 espresso beans, you might not immediately know what was wrong, but you would almost immediately know that something was wrong, that something was missing. And so that little ritual service flourish slows things down just slightly and gives people almost a litmus test to know that they're getting the genuine article, which in a situation where you're already stipulating that you need to use a specific product by a specific brand can be important. It kind of an additional reinforcement of that quality insistence. Another trait that you will often find is some sort of interactivity, right? The Jaeger bomb is either finished by the guest when the guest drops in the shot, or if that's not allowed in the specific place, when they have to then rush to drink it after it's been dropped in. I also love the porn star martini for a case study in interactivity, which is not technically a signature serve, although it may have originally been a signature serve for Pessoa, the passion fruit liqueur. So it's kind of an edge case, but it really is great when you think about interactivity, because you've got the sidecar of champagne, you've got your little vanilla passion fruit guy over here, and it's a choose your own adventure situation. You already feel special because you're double fisting, right? And everybody sees you double fisting. So you get that little thrill. And you get to choose how you go about this, right? You get to choose if you're shooting the champagne, if you're going first for the passion fruit and then using champagne as a little mini palate cleanser. You get to inform the shape of this drinking experience sheerly by the way that the cocktail is designed. Now, the Dark and Stormy also, in addition to being visually striking, has that kind of interactivity built in. It's visually striking because it's got this layered appearance, right? That's how you know it's a Dark and Stormy. That's how the name arose. So when you get your Dark and Stormy, you can choose to take the little cheeky sip off the top and get, ooh, nice pop of rum. You feel a little dangerous. Or you can choose to do the other thing, which is to stir it in, which means that you're doing a little visual magic trick. You're it's almost like you're being transported behind the bar and you're the bartender finishing the drink, right? Um, so it's both interactive and visually striking. Um, and I love the the Aperol Spritz as a very different example of a visually striking cocktail, because it's very simple. It's not layered. It's not complicated. But when you see a round of Aperol Spritzes go by on a tray, you can't not notice it. It is impossible. As long as you're not red green colorblind, as long as you can see the color red, you notice this splash of color go by with the contrast of that big bright orange garnish. You see the all that clear ice, the energetic fizzing bubbles, and you're like, wow. And visual striking, a visually striking cocktail in that way kind of initiates the fajita effect, which is like, when you go to the Mexican restaurant, they bring out the sizzling fajita platter. When this happens, the kitchen automatically starts making another couple of these orders, because they know that when that happens, somebody who just sat down is going to see that go by, hear it, smell it, say, that doesn't look half bad. I think I'll have one of those. So that relates back to that kind of flywheel effect that signature serve cocktails can have when they're designed effectively. Last thing I want to mention in this slide is the opportunity. It's certainly not a mandate, but there is a definite opportunity to use either a cultural or a brand type signal boost to improve the impact of your cocktail. And what I mean by that is, can you pair your product, right, the spirit that you make, with another brand that is important in a way that makes both of them together greater than the sum of their parts, right? So I love Ray and Ting as an example of this. Ray and Nephew Overproof Rum, perfectly lovely, very nice, affordable overproof rum. Ting, totally serviceable grapefruit soda. Maybe it's not super available in the US. You got to go to a specialty store to get it. But together, these things are so good and so easy and so effortless that if you're a rum aficionado and you take a trip to Jamaica, no matter how serious you are about collecting your overproof high ester Jamaican rum, if on the plane back from that trip you realize that you didn't have a Ray and Ting while you were there, the trip somehow doesn't feel complete, right? And I love Ranch Water as an example of this brand and cultural signal boosting as well, because I don't know about you all in Texas, but 10 years ago, Topo Chico was nowhere on the East Coast. And today, I can't walk into any grocery store of any type and not see Topo Chico featured prominently in its proper area. Um, so I love, first of all, that it's a signature serve, not for a spirit, but for bubble water, right? It's almost flipped on its head. Uh, and I don't think, again, I don't think that the cultural or the brand partnership signal boost is a necessary component for a signature serve, but I do think it's possible and it's been done well in the past, and it's certainly an option that's on the table if you're talking about virality. It can certainly help to get your brand out there if you can find somebody to partner with. Case study in virality here. This is not a signature serve cocktail. It is the Batanga, but I think, again, like some of the other cocktails on the last slide, it does virality so well in so many ways that it bears examining as a case study for virality. So it's a well cocktail, right? It's a tequila Coke, but in 3 moves, it goes from something that you could pay $6 or $8 for at a dive bar and takes that to an $18 full-fledged, full-blown craft cocktail. So the first move it does is a combo move, right? Writ large, we could call it the Cuba Libre move. It takes the regular soda gun Coke and replaces it with Mexican Coke, which is both a cultural and a brand signal boost. And then it adds the squeeze of lime, right? Which is cultural signal boost in that the Cuba Libre is a south of the border rum and Coke in the American consciousness. So not specific culture, but it's a you're on vacation somewhere south and warm signal boost. And it's also interactive because the guest gets to squeeze the lime, right? You get to choose your adventure with that. So first move, we Cuba Libre it. Second move, we get another big cultural signal with the salted rim. Usually it's a seasoned salt rim. This is also a ritual service move in that the bartender has to slow down to do it. It's an extra step, and it's a way that each bar program can actually customize this drink to their own program, which I love. Not a necessary component of a signature serve, but certainly useful in this respect. And then finally, the last move that takes this cocktail from a Cuba Libre with a salted rim to a really compelling cocktail with this huge story behind it is what I call the terroir knife. So the Patango was invented at a cocktail bar in Mexico called La Capilla, and the bartenders there were tasked not only with creating the drinks, but also with creating the fresh salsa that was served to guests. And so the knife went from being engaged in chopping tomatoes and herbs and chiles to also pulling double duty as a little cocktail stirrer. So we've got this, it's a super flourishy service thing, right? Where else are you going to see a cocktail stirred with a knife? You've got my attention. But it also has this added benefit of, you get to the bartender gets to claim that they're adding a little bit of personalized touch to the drink with the flavor of whatever was on the knife previously. So a great study in virality. It shows how many aspects of the serve you can work in these little viral touches to. Final trait I want to hit on here is brand surface area, right? So now we're at the end of the definition, talking about the specific product by the specific brand. What I mean by brand surface area is another phrase for that would be brand DNA, right? And I don't think we need to linger too long on this, but suffice it to say that you all wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be running your brands if you didn't think that you have something special that differentiates you from the rest of the pack. And that special quality is what I think of as brand DNA. And this is present especially in a flagship product, the kind that would be primed for use in a signature serve cocktail. If it's what you're leading with, if it's the first thing you're launching and what's really the economic driver of your brand, then it's got a lot of that brand DNA in there sort of by default. Now, what I love about the signature serve is that it allows me to make this sort of genotype phenotype comparison here, right? Just like I am expressing the genes that my parents gave me with brown eyes and mostly now brown hair, the signature serve expresses that brand DNA using the flavor of the drink and all the other little bells and whistles that you build into it. And the nice thing about DNA is that it is so transmissible, and this includes brand DNA. And so, what happens when a guest is drawn to that familiar yet specific value proposition that your spirit has, and they enjoy that signature serve, suddenly they're taking that brand DNA and making it a part of them. They're making it a part of how they think about flavor and a part of the choices that they make when they go out and have a good time with their friends at the bars. And hopefully, if everything's working well, if everything's lined up, everything's clicking, that turns them into the best kind of brand ambassador, which isn't someone who's constantly beating the drum for your brand. You got to pay for that. But it's somebody who, when they go out to the bar and they see your product on the back bar or they see the signature serve on a cocktail menu, they turn to their friend and they say, "Oh, have you ever had a? You haven't? Oh, well, that settles it. We need to order a couple of," and the flywheel starts turning. Another way to think about all of these qualities together is like a pill theory. The simplicity and the virality are like the simple, sleek delivery capsule, right? That's what gets the product into the hands. And once it is consumed, that's when that targeted high surface area active ingredient, that brand DNA, gets released. Probably my favorite example of a signature serve that was designed so intentionally to express the brand DNA of the product it was featuring is the revolver. Now, on paper, this is one of the least exciting cocktails I can think of. It's ounce and a half of bourbon and half an ounce of coffee liqueur. So it's not even a 2-to-1, not even a true Manhattan build. It's not an old fashioned. You can see from the image that it's served up. It's bourbon and coffee, which is like, okay, but that's kind of an obvious pairing. That's not even all that exciting. So what is it? What is it about the revolver cocktail that was so exciting at its time? And why was it such a good example of building brand DNA into a drink build? It did a couple of things that were important. One, it hijacked some popular aspects of its time and place. It was developed in San Francisco right after Bullet Bourbon was first launched. And the bartender who developed this cocktail developed it first, I believe, at a jazz bar, and then moved to Bourbon and Branch, which is a famous speakeasy style bar. So we're thinking early cocktail renaissance, dark speakeasies are still popular. Jazz bar, also sort of a dark, low light environment. This becomes important. Also, coffee. The West Coast has always had the East Coast lapped, especially back then in coffee culture. And most coffee related spirits products that get launched, I'd say the majority of them tend to be West Coast products. So it's got the coffee connection with its time and place, and it's also got this dark, low light bar setting thing going on. What happens when you order a revolver? Well, you walk into the bar, and remember, this is the early cocktail renaissance. So you walk into your dark speakeasy bar, you're excited, right? You're already primed for the past, right? Because you're visiting this speakeasy. Cocktails are this exciting new thing that has just been revived. And you look at what you like on the menu and you order the revolver. Your bartender pulls down this bottle that looks like a bottle from the Old West. So you've got this double historical priming going on. They make the connection that, well, you can't have the revolver cocktail without the brand Bullet. So now you've got this notion of Bullet and revolver inextricably tied in your mind, right? It's a logic that's so clean and so simple that it almost breaks your brain to think about ordering this cocktail with any other whiskey just because conceptually it would feel wrong. And then when they serve it to you, it's an orange twist garnish, but it's a flame garnish. And in this low light setting, what it does is it mimics a muzzle flash. So at every level of this cocktail service, you're primed for the aesthetic of Bullet Bourbon, which is a callback to a bygone era. It's got this sort of generic Old West American whiskey look and feel about it. The cocktail's called the Revolver. It's made with Bullet, and it comes with a muzzle flash. And even though the cocktail is not all that popular today, probably because I mentioned it's not a very exciting build. We've moved on from that. Uh, it still, at its time, did incredible work to bring Bullet bourbon into the consciousness of the cocktail public. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful example of how if you're really focusing, you can make every step of the cocktail experience laden with that brand DNA and that brand aesthetic. So now we're at the portion of the webinar where we move from thinking about other people's signature serves to thinking about your signature serves that you're going to be developing. Um, the first the first thing that I'm going to walk you through here is a way that I've developed to walk up to a spirit, one that you're either familiar with or one that's brand new to you, and figure out where that brand DNA starts intersecting with flavor. So this is a process that I call determining the heart of a spirit. This is something I've been developing for the past couple of years. And I know that this slide and the next one are going to have a lot of text and a lot going on. They're busy slides. So what I'd like to invite you to do is kind of sit back and watch it like a movie. Don't worry too much about following exactly what I'm saying because I'm going to give you a very clear example in just a moment. But the place where the brand DNA meets flavor in a cocktail, which is where you can really start to develop your signature serve build, involves category. And this is something that we're not, as bartenders, always thinking too much about. So that's why I'm bringing it to your attention here. And that's why this process is easy and very useful once you figure it out. So to me, the heart of a spirit is a flavor evident characteristic that illuminates a product's role and placement within its category, which sounds very complicated, but it's not. So let me give you an example. Let's say you've got a bourbon, and here are some things about that bourbon. That bourbon is 4 years old. It's 50% ABV. When you pour it into a Glencairn, you notice that it's golden in color, and it tastes like the following: caramel, vanilla, citrus zest, honeysuckle, peach pie, orange blossom. In our hypothetical, this is what we're working with. So let's put this hypothetical bourbon through the heart of the spirit process. Let's break down that label. 4 years and 50% ABV indicates a bottled and bond bourbon. That's the category. Here's the category that we're working with. In the case of the folks in this webinar, we're working with American Agave as the category, Sotol, American Single Malt, American Whiskey, and Gin, right? So these are going to be the categories that you're thinking about when you're trying to, if you choose to go through this process. But the thing about bottle and bond bourbon is that it's often oaky, robust, full-bodied, and it showcases these barrel flavors, right? Otherwise, why would you age it for 4 years and bottle it at that proof point if you weren't trying to feature the barrel properties? If you're not trying to do that, there are other, better, more profitable ways to put that bourbon in a bottle. So then we look at the color and we realize that most bottled and bond bourbons are dark in color. That's something we know about this category. So the fact that this one is golden in color may be a bit unexpected. Next, we look at the flavor, the tasting notes and nosing notes. I mean, it's bourbon, caramel, vanilla. We expect that. We expect that across the board pretty much. But then we get down and we realize, citrus zest, honeysuckle, peach pie, orange blossom. Comparatively few bourbons, especially the dark, oaky, bottled and bond bourbons, are going to be showcasing such an abundance of citrus and floral notes. So when we look at the category overall and what we know and assume about this larger category, and then when we look at our specific product in relation to that category, we do a little bit of triangulation using the flavor evidence in the bottle, and we realize that the heart of this spirit is brightness, which is to say it's an argument that not all bottled and bond bourbon needs to be dark, strong, and oaky. So by taking your time, by thinking about the category, by thinking about how your product differentiates itself from the other members of that category, and by locating specific flavor evidence that supports that, you can very quickly come to a simple, concise understanding of what this spirit is doing. And when you've got the heart of that spirit, when you've got that thing that really drives its meaning, then you can start developing a cocktail around that, right? If you were to give me a bottled and bond bourbon and say, design me a cocktail around bottled and bond bourbon, that's not enough to go on. But when you give me a bottled and bond bourbon and tell me this one is bright and floral and citrusy and does things that are unexpected in that category, is differentiated in this way, now I'm thinking about other flavors. Now I'm thinking about other bourbon cocktails and how I can make a cocktail that stands out in relation to those. So I know that these were two complicated slides, and I know that this is a process that's a little bit unique to me, so I'm happy to walk you through it if it's something you want to talk a little bit more about. But I think it's a useful way of trying to figure out what the brand DNA is doing and how that product is differentiated from other examples of its category, because that's going to be important as you build your cocktails. Quickly here, ways to work with the brand. There's no substitute for a boots on the ground visit to the distillery, but if that's not in the cards for you, definitely get that Zoom meeting scheduled and get those get yourself ready to nose and taste along with the folks you're going to be meeting with. The folks you want to interface with are the keepers of the story and the keepers of the process, the people who built the brands and the people who are engaged day after day with making the product. Those are going to be the people, bartenders, who can unlock this product for you and help you along your journey. As you're trying to find this story, find this way to connect the flavor evidence that we were just talking about with the brand DNA, my tip to you is to look not so much at the what's, but at the how's and the why's. If you look at big spirits brand advertising, more often than not, they're advertising a how and a why. They're advertising an ethos. They're advertising a way you should feel, as opposed to advertising the literal material that is in the bottle. So take a cue from that. Take a cue from what successful brands are already doing as you're building the signature serve, and focus on those. And then finally, if throughout this process, you should be keeping detailed notes. I know that helps me. Maybe it doesn't help you, but it certainly helps me. And as you're keeping these detailed notes, if you're struggling to find one successful path in this cocktail, maybe you also start identifying what's not going to work. And if you're overwhelmed by the sheer weight of possibilities, identifying what's not going to work, kind of going at it from the other direction, might help you winnow your way to the strategy that is going to be most successful in your situation. So just a few pointers. Finally, once you've got yourself a functional signature serve build, you want to run it through this checklist as a bit of a litmus test. Because if it's too complicated, again, it's not going to be as effective behind the bar. So we want to make sure it's got as few bottle touches as possible. We want to make sure that it's easy to serve as a round as well as an individual serving, right? If there's some one fatal characteristic that makes it take twice as long to build as a round, maybe that's something we want to try and design out of the drink, because it's not going to be as effective when it hits the real world. Contrary to what other competitions want you to do, in this case, it probably makes the most sense to keep your story as a bartender out of it, because again, that's distracting from the specific product and the specific brand. I know that seems like sort of the fun part of a competition, is being able to build your bartender story into it. But I think in this situation, being tasked with the responsibility of literally creating the vessel that is going to introduce this brand to a whole new set of consumers is a pretty cool responsibility to have. So maybe that's something to think about if you're bummed that the bartender story is taking the back seat. Finally, what guests should see when you're presenting this cocktail are the viral and the brand DNA components of it. And everything else should be either speedy, hidden, or convenient. What that allows you to do is, if everything is speedy, hidden, and convenient, you get to spend more time. You get to almost do that thing where you slow time down and conduct people and build that anticipation, specifically using those brand and viral components of the cocktail that you want people to get the most excited about. They're not sitting there watching you do something boring behind the bar. The final litmus test is this. If you zoom all the way back out, you can say, is the signature serve that I've created emblematic of the feelings that I am trying to evoke in someone when they drink it? And to bring it full circle, the painkiller cocktail is emblematic of what we might call tropical decadence. When you drink one, you are on vacation. Are there cocktails out there that do tropical decadence almost as well as, or just as well as the painkiller? Maybe. But because of its build and because of how effectively it has worked its way into the cultural consciousness, there is no cocktail that does tropical decadence better than the painkiller. Similarly, there's no single beverage that epitomizes youth and party energy more than the Jaeger bomb. When you see this picture, all you can think is, oh my goodness, all of the questionable decisions are about to be made right now. And I'm so happy for Jägermeister that they found such a creative way to get a bunch of consumers who otherwise would want nothing to do with their product to become little mini brand ambassadors for this cocktail. And finally, the Dark and Stormy has come to epitomize this feeling of being safe in port, right? The brand story of how this was developed is, or how it was named rather, was somebody walked by at one point and they saw this layered appearance of the Dark and Stormy and said, ah, that looks like a storm that I wouldn't sail into, or something to that effect. And it happened to be the perfect name for this drink because it exactly symbolizes what's going on at the flavor level, which is you've got something that looks ominous, and then when you drink it, you've got this simultaneously spicy and stimulating, but also soothing and sweet cocktail. So it's like there's danger just off over there at the horizon, but for you, you get to watch the storm play out safe and dry in port. So that is the power of what a signature serve can do. That is the associative, connotative power of a really well-designed signature serve cocktail. I hope that this was useful in giving you different ways to think about designing your signature serves for this competition. And if you're joining us after the fact, as we publish this to the ADI YouTube channel, I hope that this gives you a couple of different tools to think about potentially implementing a signature serve for your distillery operation. Please feel free to go ahead and scan the QR code on this slide. That is every possible way to connect with me digitally. Email, social media, phone, contact. So if you do scan that QR, you'll have full access to me, be able to reach out to me at any point during this competition, and I'm happy to help. Think of me as your concierge in this respect. I want everybody here to succeed and have a good experience. So please do reach out early and often as you have questions. This is where we'll conclude the webinar. But I do have time set aside for a Q&A session here. So let's go ahead and, John, can we unmute our participants and maybe take a look at the chat? I'll stop my screen share.